All right, we're about ready to start, right? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
So I want to get, while we give it a second for folks to join us, I want to do a quick pulse check for everyone who's tuned in with us. Use the chat box and just let us know, where do you stand in terms of just your awareness with the concept of social engineering, which essentially, how would you just quickly summarize what social engineering is for folks like myself, Erich, who really don't even understand the term still?
Yeah, so social engineering. Social engineering is a practice of manipulating human emotions, basically, to get something somebody wants. It's essentially scams and cons is social engineering. Using social norms, things like some of the tricks are a lot of companies have two doors in the front of their buildings, right? Especially in cold climates. So the first door is typically not locked. It lets people get in, and then they take a badge and they hit the second thing, which has the latch to open it up. If you open the first door and hold the door for somebody, they feel like they need to reciprocate and will often hold the second door for you, which is a secure door. So if you have a badge that even looks legitimate, you can show it to them and they go, okay, and then they let you in. So tricks like that, using human behavior against us.
Wow, that was an awesome explanation. So quick pulse check in the chat box, everyone who's tuned in with us today for our Tech for Good webinar through TechSoup, what's your knowledge level with this concept? Is it completely new to you? Do you know a little bit? If there's anything you're hoping to learn today, throw that in there. But let's just hear from you guys kind of where you stand with your knowledge base around this concept. Moderate. I've seen the Kevin Mitnick movie. What is that?
I didn't know he had a movie. He's done a number of books. Maybe you're thinking of Frank Abagnale. That was Catch Me If You Can.
Ooh,
With
yes.
what's his name? Leonardo DiCaprio, right?
Yep.
Yeah, from Titanic, of course. I've met him a couple of times actually, and fascinating guy. And that's what he used, pretending to be an airline pilot, right? Just going up in an outfit. And one of the things we talk about in the social engineering side of the world is with a clipboard and some confidence, you can get just about anywhere you need to go.
Yeah.
You
Agreed.
show up, yeah, you look confident, you look like you belong, act like you belong, people assume you belong.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that, and also for sharing that link. I'm really excited to introduce Erich, but a little bit about me first and just kind of this program. If you aren't familiar with the NetSquared Tech for Good groups, and my name's Erica Woods. I know a lot of you. I lived in Baltimore for a very, very long time and had the privilege of being one of four folks who started the Baltimore NetSquared Tech for Good group circa November 2014. And what I think is still amusing is that when we started that group, because we saw a real need in Baltimore to bring together technology folks like Erich, who really want to help nonprofits but didn't have a platform to do so, with nonprofits like yourself who are just in dire need of understanding these core concepts like social engineering, so that you can keep yourself safe and also anyone that you're helping within your community. So when we started that group, I had no idea it was actually a global effort by TechSoup, right? And then a year later, we came, the Baltimore Tech for Good group became associated with TechSoup. And then a couple of years later, I very impulsively moved to the Tampa, Florida area. As Erich can relate as a neighbor, it is quite gorgeous here. And so I didn't want to go home. And so about a year after moving here, I started with Steve and Naomi, the Tech for Good group here in Tampa Bay. And our goal, just like the Baltimore group and all the other Tech for Good groups across the world, is to really, again, bring together experts like Erich to explain and educate these concepts of social engineering, websites, WordPress, data platforms, anything in that technology or social marketing space, social media marketing space. We want to make sure that you guys are educated, no cost, no buts. And then that way you can use that education and continue to do the amazing work through your nonprofit initiatives. So on that note, Erich Kron, I had the pleasure of meeting Erich a couple months ago. He's a security awareness advocate for KnowBe4, which is one of the leading organizations that provide cyber education to, what did you say your customer base is, Erich? Over 30,000 customers across the world?
Yeah, about 32,000 customers now.
Whew. And Erich, as you guys heard from the introduction, very knowledgeable on this concept, and that's his job. He's one of 3 advocates and evangelists at KnowBe4, and his goal in life is to educate folks on different concepts to help organizations stay safe, to educate their employees. So Erich, so happy to have you here today. Thank you.
Yeah, thrilled to be here. Love offering whatever help we can, any way we can to folks, especially in the not-for-profit community. We know that, the attacks are coming, money's limited. And this is something that's been going on since the dawn of time, quite frankly. It's something that we've been struggling with for years. And, like I said, I'm always happy to share the experience that I have with anyone that I can to help them. So having said that, let's hop right into the slides then. What do you say, Erica? All right, cool beans. All right, so social engineering 101, we're not going to get super deep into this because I can do this talk for hours on end and get into all kinds of things behind it. But I want to make sure that people understand a little bit more. We've seen, through the chat that there's some people that have moderate knowledge about this, that are familiar with it. So I'm going to get into some of the principles behind it and how it works. Please, please, please. If you have questions, let's put them in the chat and I will be happy to get to as many of them as I can. Always happy to do that. It is a fascinating subject for people like me. I mean, I travel a lot for work. This is my job, is to cruise around the country and talk. Well, one of the things I also like to do is sit back and watch human interactions. And of course, airports are an amazing place for that sort of thing. You see people in all kinds of different situations, from joy and elation to seeing people that they haven't seen for a while, to the ever so stressful situations when things go wrong when flying, right? And so I try to be a student of people and try to see how they react to things. It's a fascinating subject for me, and I like to share that with other people too, because I know a lot of people also go, wow, it's kind of neat to peel that back. So we're going to talk about how attackers, especially in the phishing and what's called smishing, which is SMS phishing or text message phishing spaces, work, and how they manipulate people using social engineering techniques. That's what we're going to talk about. So a little bit about me. Again, I've been in the industry since the mid 1990s. I have been in all kinds of different places. I've been in manufacturing. I've been in medical. I was with the U.S. Army for about 10 years as a contractor. I ended up being the security manager at the 2nd Regional Cyber Center Western Hemisphere, which is a mouthful when you have to answer the phone like that every time. But I've been in, like I said, just about every kind of category of place to be over the years. Now, I've gained a lot of experience through that, and I've seen a lot of things. And one thing that became very, very upfront to me and very real to me kind of early on in my career is how much people were a problem. Now, I use that term lightly because it's not their fault, right? But the people, from a technical standpoint, the people are where a lot of things go wrong. Phishing, attacks like that, social engineering attacks are where 91% of successful data breaches happen. It's a terrifying number, but it's true. And what we have to do, though, is we have to make sure that people understand how to defend themselves against this sort of thing, right? So that's why I'm so passionate about this and trying to help people do that. Now, our organization, again, down here in Tampa, as Erica said, once you come here, it's hard to go home. The weather is good, and unless you show up in like July or August, when it's about 200% humidity. But we got about 31,000 customers, like we said, maybe 32,000 customers now. We do security awareness training and simulated phishing. It's a platform we provide to people online on demand where they can train their people and then turn around and do simulated phishing attacks on them as well. And the reason for doing that is to give them a chance to practice with stuff that if they mess up, it doesn't hurt anything, as opposed to practicing what they learned on real phishing attacks, right? Kind of makes sense when you think about it that way. And it's very, very effective how this works. So it's not a cybersecurity conference type, presentation if we don't start off with a quote by Sun Tzu. You may have read this book, kind of a recent one. All warfare is based on deception is the quote here. And I like this, although it is a little bit scary. And I'm not a big proponent of what's called FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But let me tell you, when we talk about warfare in this case, that is actually what we're dealing with. And I say that because what we have is we have nation states involved with this. We've all heard that China and North Korea and Iran and all these have these incredible hacking programs. Absolutely, they do. It's nation states in a lot of cases. It's also organized crime. You know, the old people used to go around with bats and break knees for not paying payments or whatever. This organized crime stuff has now gotten into this because it's so beneficial and so lucrative. They are making billions of dollars a year through this. So these groups are getting in there. What's important to understand is the people that are running most of the attacks we see out there these days, they're going to be cybercrime gangs, nation states, or some sort of an organized crime. It is not the kid in the basement with the hoodie on, eating pizza, drinking Mountain Dew. Okay, that's not what we have going on here. This is actual organized businesses, and they treat them like businesses. So the key is the deception part here. And what that means is when it comes to deception, what they're doing is they're messing with how we see things. They're deceiving us into clicking on links, opening documents, doing things like that. And that's true. All warfare is based on deception. Now we're going to start off, we're going to have a little fun here. This is kind of what we're talking about today, perception versus reality, OODA loop, how these different components are being subverted and how we can defend ourselves. So let's start with the perception versus reality. We're going to have a little bit of fun. Don't know if you've ever seen this before, but I am going to channel the magic of PowerPoint into a card trick here. So let's start with this. I want you to pick a card. Pick any card. Remember what that card is. I'm going to make that card disappear. Are you ready? Here we go. Through the magic of this PowerPoint transformation here, and that's where all the power is. It's in PowerPoint. I've removed your card, haven't I? So everybody here should be nodding their head. Yes, yes, yes. Well, how did we do that? How did we remove your card? Well, it's actually fairly simple. First thing we do is we get you to focus on removing a card. So you pick a card and you stick your eyes on that card, right? This is going to be the deck that you originally chose from. And then what we do is we replace it with this one. What do you notice about them now? Right. They are completely different. But there's patterns in play here. Red king, black king on the left, black queen, black jacks on the right in that pattern. Now, if I replace that second deck there with a bunch of, number cards, 1 through whatever, or ace through whatever, you would have noticed immediately, right? But the patterns are there to kind of fool you where you don't see that. And that's the whole idea here. This is just a misdirection. By getting you to focus on one card, we're misdirecting the fact that we're basically yanking the tablecloth out from underneath all of the stuff. So this is just an example of one of the ways that our brains work and how easy it is to kind of deceive that. Now, the truth is, once you know how this trick is performed, you're going to nod your head and go, yeah, I know how that's done, right? But the first time it happens to you, the first time you see this, it's kind of like, how did that happen, right? And that's a usual response. But that's how our brain works. Once we're familiar with the way that the attack works, boom, we know how to defend ourselves against it, right? So understanding the root of deception, that comes down to our brains. Our brains are wonderful, lovely, fantastic things, but they do things that we don't necessarily realize that they do, and that is filter, interpret, and present reality. We always think what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell. All of these things are reality. But what if I told you your brain applies filters to these? And your brain applies filters to these basically since our childhood. When we started learning, we see that if I do this, this occurs. Now, our brain is already wired to understand that this will mean this, okay? That happens very often. There's other things that happen too, though, with it that are pretty eye-opening, if you will. Who remembers what color the dress was, right? Blue and black or gold and white, Okay, two people, or same place, looking at the same monitor, see two different things. That's your brain filtering one thing and doing another. There are some physical characteristics as well, but even if you know both of them are in there, you can only see one or the other without a lot of effort. Same with that sound, Yanni and Laurel. We all saw that or heard that. It's the same thing. Even though you know that both sounds are in there, once your brain locks onto one, it filters out all the other stuff. Another example, I'm going to show my age here, folks. So bear with me. If you remember back in the day, they used to have these pictures and you would stare at them. They were like 3D shapes or whatever. And you stare at them and you cross your eyes for a little bit. And eventually like a whale pops out of these strange, square shapes, whatever patterns. All of a sudden this whale pops out of there, right? Now, once you've seen that whale, when you look at that picture again, you will see the whale again. Your brain has filtered out all of the other stuff. It knows how to spot it. And last but not least is your nose. So if you think about it, when you look, even side to side, unless you're looking for it or thinking about it, your brain does not see your nose in the way. Now, I have a pretty good size nose. It tends to get very much in the way, but our brain filters that piece out. It's something it does automatically. And this is the fascinating pieces to our brains. It applies filters, interprets, and presents reality. And that's what the bad guys really go after. They try to change how that happens. It's remarkable. So we'll talk a little bit about the OODA loop if you haven't heard about that. The OODA loop is something that was, it's a very simple thing, but it's actually how our brains process a lot of things when it comes to decision making. So when we talk about this, magicians, pickpockets, con artists, all these, they use the principles we're about to discuss. Now, the OODA loop started off in aviation. And the idea behind this was this is a decision process that was broken down by a guy named John Boyd. He's the one that created the OODA loop. And these folks, when they're doing these military maneuvers and stuff, they have to be very conscious about their decision making. This happens to be a picture of the Blue Angels. And if you notice in his visor, he's flying very, very closely to some other aircraft. You better have some pretty good decision making going on here because, as you're adjusting your flight patterns and things like that, it is absolutely critical that you get this right. But this is the source of this. Now, it has been used as a process now for other types of business type things, and it has been applied across the board to other things. So what is the OODA loop? Well, the OODA loop is kind of like this. It is basically 4 steps: observe, orient, decide, and act. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means that you observe where you're at. So you look around and you see what's going on. You orient. That means, where am I in this mess of things going on? Okay. So maybe I'm standing in a room and I see that I am in one spot and I really want to be one step to the right. Okay. So I have oriented. I've seen the area. I've observed it. I've oriented myself as here. I want to be here. Now I decide what to do. This is the decision to make a step to the right. And then I do the action. I take that step to the right. Now, my mind goes back through this loop. I observe the area. I orient. Am I where I want to be? Did that step do what I wanted to do or not? Right. And then I decide that maybe stay here or whatever. And then you take the action. But that's kind of how this cycle constantly revolves in our brain when it comes to making this decision process. Now, the ideal situation for a social engineer is to hijack the OODA loop by creating a knee-jerk reaction. Okay. The idea is we effectively bypass those first 3 steps. And to make a point of this, when you bypass those first 3 steps are our critical thinking steps. We observe, orient, and decide. Now, if I, as a social engineer, can change one of these or impact one of these, it directly affects the action that I'm going to take. And that's the key to this. So sometimes what they do is you can change the observation piece of it, right? So in a social engineering kind of sense here, right? if somebody comes up to you and they're wearing a hard hat and a, safety vest and a clipboard, and they say, I need to get into, I need to go look at this, you're going to make some assumptions. You're going to assume that they're here on official business, so on and so forth. That is your observation side. You're going to see them and you make a decision based on what you see. So they can tweak that by what they're wearing, what they're doing, right? Guy comes up to you in a black hoodie and says, hey, I need to get in here to look at this, right? Not to use the hacker black hoodie thing, but you're going to have a different reaction to them as somebody who is wearing a day glow vest and maybe even carrying a ladder. I saw fantastic YouTube clips where people went into these different businesses. It was two people, they're wearing those safety vests and they're carrying a ladder. And they walked right into movie theaters. They walked into like just about anywhere because people just make that assumption. By observing them, we have now influenced that. And our action is then to let them in or say nothing because we just assume they should be there, right? So then orientation, if you can make people think that you want to be somewhere else or how you are in the mix of things. And this also applies to things that are applying to that person. In other words, does it matter to me that this is going on? No, it doesn't. Okay, fine. And then of course the decision piece. So all of those things impact the action that happens afterwards. And that's what's important to understand is how our brain works there and just how easy it is to kind of tweak some of these things, honestly. So moving on, they subvert these components. That's what they do. And if you've ever seen this show, I love this show. I don't recommend cuddling up with the kiddos to watch it. It's kind of a raw show, but it's about hacking, and it's called Mr. Robot. Now, in this show, they use real live attack scenarios, okay? And they use real tools. It's not made up stuff. One of the key things they use is social engineering. And in one place, they're looking to break into this building that's supposed to be very hard to get into. And they're looking at photographs. And the guy said, I just don't see how we're going to get into that. And I think it was Elliot there looks at it and says, well, I see 8 vulnerabilities right here, 3 vulnerabilities, something like that. And the guy's going, where? And he said, the people. And that's exactly how these bad guys look at this. So I love this quote from him, Elliot Alderson. I've never found it hard to hack most people. If you listen to them and watch them, their vulnerabilities are like a neon sign screwed into their heads. And this is very true. As humans, again, we have these vulnerabilities. I see it all the time. Every year they have this thing called DEF CON, and this is done in Vegas, big hacking conference. And there's something called the social engineering capture the flag. What they do is they put people up in a soundproof booth with microphones inside, and they sit in front of like 400 strangers, but they start calling companies. And they're tasked with gathering information from these people in order to basically build a profile as if they were a hacker. So they call these companies and they'll use different techniques where they'll be helpful or they may be a little bit aggressive or whatever, but they start asking them questions. They find out what type of computer they're running, what operating system they're running. I've seen them pull out what type of HID cards, the little ones that you like scan badges with. I mean, this is all incredibly valuable information for hackers. What their antivirus is. Well, if I know what that is, then I can work to bypass that if I'm going to send malware your way. I mean, I've seen people give away tons of information, and it's all done over phone calls. There's even a YouTube video out there if you want to, if you look for it. It's a person does social engineering on a cell. It was, I don't remember if it was Verizon or one of the cell companies, but basically they took over an account of the reporter in a matter of a couple of minutes. And she downloaded a YouTube video or had a YouTube video playing on a laptop in the background of a screaming baby. And if I'm not mistaken, the pretext or the story that she used was, my husband is deployed, trying to fix this stuff. I don't know what's going on. And she actually got the cellular carrier to make her a primary on the account just over the phone, right? This is the kind of stuff that happens. And it's because this person wanted to be helpful because they thought this person was in trouble or having, hardships. This happened over and over again. It was an amazing thing to watch how quickly this happens. That's what social engineering is. That's the vulnerabilities we're talking about here. Now we see this played out in phishing all the time. this is one of the ways that they do it. This was one a couple of years ago now, during, when we had a lot of the school shootings. And here's the thing, attackers, they don't care. They don't care about your feelings. They don't care about whether it's right or whether it's wrong. They really don't. They'll do anything to bypass critical thinking. So as this was going on, tensions were already very high. So we saw these going out. This is an actual email that went out, and it went out to a college. Okay. Security alert reported on campus. This is what it is. And what it did, an emergency scare earlier reported, kindly go through the memo released and follow the outline protocol. In this case, what they did is it took them to a Microsoft login page. Now, this particular college used Microsoft for their email provider. So people didn't think it was unusual to log into their Microsoft account to be able to do it. Well, the bad guys then stole the credentials. And then they could get into this and use it for attacking other people from a legitimate account. The other thing people use this for once they steal a set of credentials or even get one out of other breaches is something called credential stuffing. And that is where you take a username and a password that a person uses, and you try it on different websites. So let's say the knitting forum that you're a member of gets hacked and they end up losing all of your credentials. If you use that same username and password on Amazon, they're going to try to plug that into Amazon. Now they're in there and they can buy things on Amazon using your credit card or your email, or even worse, banks. People reuse passwords across the board. And this is a very dangerous thing. There's another derivative of that called password spraying. And that is where they take a username that they get from one of these areas, and they use, if you've ever seen that top 10 common passwords thing that goes out every year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they'll pair those together and try to do logins using that as well. So if you're using one of those standard ones, that's a problem, because password spraying will let people into your account. But this is what they're doing to try to get this information. You can see they're dealing with fear here. They're dealing with concern. And this is what they're doing to do these attacks. You've also seen these ads, clickbait. There's science to it. The top 10 things that blah, 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 blah. Number 4 will blow your mind, right? This is actually scientific. Uses what's called pattern interruption based on the information gap theory. So they give you some of the information, but not all of the information. And then you want to know the rest of that information. It's the FOMO thing, or fear of missing out, if you will. And it deprives us of the answer. Well, now that makes us curious and we want to go click on things. It's absolutely amazing how well these work. That's why you see so many ads that are just like this, because they work. Well, we also see the bad guys do this in malvertising, it's called. It's malicious advertising. So we'll see stuff like this right now with COVID-19 going on. You'll see stuff that's, get more information from the government here, blah, 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 blah. I can't believe there's this trick to getting your check sooner. Or, we live in Florida. Haven't we been in the news a little bit on an unemployment website, right? Here's a hack to getting your unemployment filed in Florida, right? These things are all going to get people to want to do this. Now, the bottom left one there, I have 5 things you want to know about clickbait, or you need to know about clickbait. Number 4 will blow your mind, folks. That is a clickbait ad for clickbait. I just love that. I have to include that one. The other thing that these do often is leverage 2 of the major emotions that people have, and that is outrage and anger. They are the 2 top emotions that will get people to perform an action. So if I can scare you, or anger you rather, or make you outraged, I can get you to perform an action. And you see this in the political world all the time, right? Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. Can you believe so-and-so did this? Click this link to go and, sign the petition. And we need to confirm you. So we need to know everything about you and your mom and your social and all of that. Those are ploys used to get that sort of information. And it's very, very effective. If I can outrage or anger somebody, it's going to be very, very effective to get that kind of information. So we see this a lot. Business email compromise. These are attacks that are meant to not necessarily have any attachments. Okay. This is like wire transfer fraud. hey, so-and-so, I need you to transfer some money to this place or that place because blah, 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 blah. They're pretending to be the executive director or a CEO or something along those lines. There's no payload. In other words, the technical things, it's hard for them to see that because there's, no malware attached and stuff like that. They tend to be very targeted. Now, these oftentimes use what's called OSINT, or open source intelligence. That's stuff like LinkedIn, Facebook, all the stuff that's out there on the web about you that we don't have to pay for. That's open source intelligence, and it is mind blowing how much is out there. So they can target these things and personalize them towards people. You have a CEO, for example, and on your page, you want to show what a great person the CEO is. So you're like, oh, this CEO supports the Humane Society, for example, right? Well, now I know if I'm going to target somebody, I may put together an email that says, it's supposed to come from the CEO, and it's going to go to, say, a financial controller that says, hey, during this COVID crisis, the Humane Society is really struggling. I need you to send them 10 grand right now. I'll take care of the paperwork afterwards, but otherwise it's going to be really ugly. And you may realize that, oh, you know what? The CEO loves this sort of thing. Yes. Okay. And that's going to make it very, very effective. So this is the kind of attack that really doesn't do anything technical, but makes a lot of money. We're talking billions of dollars every year that are being lost to these kinds of attacks. Supply chain and invoice fraud. This is ones where people will either make up invoices and send them out, or more than likely they'll try to get into an account. And when they get into the account, what they'll do, the email account, what they'll do is they'll start sending messages with either fake invoices or real invoices and say, oh, I gave you the wrong email or the wrong account number. Send the payment here instead. We see this all the time. We also see it in business or in real estate transactions, both on the personal and commercial side. We see this happen over and over again, right? So it's time to send your down payment on your home. Here's the account you wire that to. Oh, wait, we have the wrong account number. Do it to this one instead. That sort of stuff going on all the time right now. Happens commercial and personal. There was someone in Florida lost 70 grand on their down payment for their personal home like that. This is an interesting example. This is a 48-year-old Lithuanian guy tricked two American companies, it was Google and Facebook, into wiring him $100 million. He spun up some offshore companies that sounded similar to major vendors that had worked with these two companies and just started sending them invoices. And they paid him to the tune of $100 million before it all came out that, wait a minute, this isn't right. Very simple to do, but also, I mean, if you think about it, it's very low tech, but wow, what a payoff, right? $100 million. That's nothing to scoff at. So what we've been seeing lately is this, and I wanted to bring this up. COVID-19 has gone off the charts for people. This will give you an idea of what's been going on. People are working from home now. They're not in the same situation where they have corporate protections and things like that in place. And it's gotten really, really ugly. So if you look here, starting in the week of March 8th to the 14th, there were 16 brand new phishing templates that we could see that were strictly related to COVID-19. So that means different kinds of attacks, right? Brand new attacks, 16 of them. The next week, the 15th through the 21st of March, 36 brand new ones. And the week after that, though, 22nd through 28th, 94 brand new templates being used to attack people using COVID-19. It's gone off the charts. The guy that one of the guys that we have that his job is to actually look through this, he put this chart together. He said a lot of the traditional spam groups, which is the sending you ads for things you don't want, right? They've actually switched gears and moved over to doing phishing because they have that in place already, the ability to send emails, but it is so lucrative. They've made the jump from that. Now on the plus side, I'm getting less phone calls about, talking about my car warranty, right? But it's definitely happening where people are using this to target. So how do you defend yourselves? Well, the first thing you need to do is understand if you're being manipulated. I like to tell people if an email, a text message, or a phone call elicits an emotional response, be very, very careful, right? So in this case, we're looking at the lures they use are greed, like the Nigerian prince scam, right? That guy's been trying to give away money for years. Curiosity, like the clickbait stuff, self-interest, urgency, urgency, urgency. Now, I have yet to see an email, and I had somebody say they have, but I've never seen one that says, hey, whenever you might feel like getting around to it, go ahead and do this, right? I've never seen a phishing email that's like that. You know, if you get a chance, why don't you go ahead and do this? No, no, no. It's always urgency. There's something going on. There's somebody upset. There's some reason that this has to be done quickly. Why? Because they don't want you to have the time to apply those critical thinking steps that we talked about from the OODA loop, right? Think about the times you've been upset or angry, and what kind of decisions do you make in that mind frame, right? Are they good decisions usually? Are they well thought out decisions? No, not typically, right? That's what they're leaning on here. Of course, fear. You know, we have those ones that are going around that talk about the government's going to come, or the IRS is going to come get you. You know, unless you pay the IRS and iTunes gift cards, really, let's think about that. In the next, 12 hours, we're going to come arrest you. Those generate a lot of fear, right? And it gets people to overlook the fact that you're paying the IRS and iTunes gift cards, right? I'm only imagining every IRS agent has like every song in iTunes already to them. I don't know. But then helpfulness too. Again, when you see stuff like this, you're going to see like COVID, you're going to see fake charities. You're going to see things like that. People may even, as a not-for-profit, may even try to spoof you to get people to take money and give to another organization, thinking they're helping you out, right? But that's another kind of attack that we see. If you have any of these, be super, super cautious with them and try to step back, take a deep breath and go, does this really make sense? Is there really a Nigerian prince wanting to send me money, right? Those are the key things there. Now we have this, it's our 22 red flags. You can actually get a PDF. It's free for download from us. 22 red flags. And essentially what it's designed to do is get people to look at an email and go, you know what? Okay, these are some things I can look at. Is the reply to address right? If I hover a link, does it actually go to where it says it goes? And I like to tell people it's as easy as going, 2 a.m. on Saturday, I got an email from the HR department, and that's unusual. Maybe I should be real careful with this one. That's kind of the thought process you want to have with this, but this PDF is fantastic and gives you a way to kind of quickly look at these things and go, okay, these are some things I should check on. I love this document for that. As a matter of fact, a lot of us Nosters at Know-Before, we have this printed out and in our cubes in the office as well. So does training work? Yes, it does. It's a great actually place to put some of your resources. All right. We did this study. This was 4 million users. We tracked them for a year. Initial click rates on phishing emails, 37.9% on these 4 million users in about 3 months. And that means training and doing 1 or 2 of those simulated phishing attacks, it was down to 14%. So way over half, a reduction by over half. And then at the end of the year, they were down to 4.7%. That is a ridiculous change in people from almost 38% to less than 5%. And frankly, I see less than this a lot of times. I see it down in the 1 and 2%. Now it's important to understand, we don't say we're a solution. There is no silver bullet to stop the phishing thing. All right. You need layers in place. You need email gateways to help reduce the amount that's getting in. Google just released something, said they are blocking 18 million COVID-19 themed phishing emails every single day. 18 million per day just for COVID-19, right? So you need that kind of stuff in the front end. You need to, get that there. And then you also need stuff on the other end as well. You need good antivirus on your computers. You need to make sure that if somebody does click on something, that the antivirus can catch it. You also need to have really good backups in place because ransomware is a thing now and it's pretty ugly, right? So there's these layers that you have to have in place. Now the user is kind of the place where it pivots from being proactive to reactive. In other words, all of these things we're trying to stop from getting to the user. Some of them are going to get through. Nothing is 100%. And then the user, if they click on that, now you're relying on your antivirus, your endpoint protection. Now you're relying on these other tools to try to recover from the fact that the user clicked on it. And again, I'm not blaming the user. It's not their fault, but they are the target. And that's why we want to really try to help people um, learn how to spot these things and protect themselves. Not only does it help them at work, it helps them at home. Once you learn to spot scams, you can spot them every day, kind of like that magic trick that I showed you. Once you know how to spot these things, it makes it a whole lot easier to stay safe at home. So this is why it's very important. I do see a question here about, is there a link to the document? I can get a link to that 22 red flags PDF for y'all. You can also Google it, no before 22 red flags PDF, and it should pop right up on top of Google. So the way we work it is, we have basically 4 steps. The goal is to make employees, have employees make smarter security decisions every day. We do a baseline test, we train people, we do simulated phishing, and then we see the results. And as they get better, we make them a little bit tougher, more like what's really happening out there. And it's a continuous thing. You don't want to train people once a year and think they're going to know about it for the rest of the time. You want to fish people at least once a month with the simulated ones. And again, it gives them a chance to practice what you teach them, where if they mess up, it doesn't really hurt the organization and they have a chance to learn from that. That's the whole idea. So if somebody clicks on a link and it's not a legitimate link, it will take them to what we call a landing page and give them some point of failure training. You can also automatically enroll someone in like a 5-minute type of training from that as well. But you want to see the results and again, continue to make it tougher. But it's really very, very easy. The beauty about the system right now is even if people are dispersed and working from home, A, it's inexpensive, and B, we can deploy it because it's an online on-demand sort of deal. We can deploy the training within a day or two. It's very, very easy to do. It's one of the easiest things you can do in security. It's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it, because the impact is so high. So having said that, that's about all I got for slides. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. Follow me on Twitter there. I do more on the @Erich Kron Twitter account than I do the KB4 Erich. But feel free to reach out to me however you like. Always happy to answer questions. So Erica, you got anything for us?
So I don't know if you broke down what ransomware was. I know you referenced it. That might be a helpful concept to share.
Cool. Yeah. Ransomware is the scourge of everything right now, frankly. Ransomware is basically a type of malware or malicious software that gets in systems, and it uses encryption, the same stuff that keeps us safe, to basically take over and take hold of all of your data. And then they charge you a ransom to give you the keys to decrypt the data. Okay. So basically, they take all of your stuff and say, you can't work until you fix this. Now, this has been a huge, huge issue. We saw it a few years back with what was called WannaCry that took out the national health system in Britain. We saw what Baltimore, Atlanta got hit with it, but it also hits tiny little organizations as well. And it goes after individuals. So imagine you download something on your machine, you double click this file, whatever, and now it pops up a thing and says, all of your data is ours. You can't, you have to pay us $500 to get it back or whatever. You could lose all of the pictures of your kids, like all the digital stuff there, all of the stuff that you have to work for, tax records, all the stuff that we keep digitally on computers now. And it's really smart. A lot of times they will target backups. If they can find a backup, they will also encrypt that backup so you can't restore it. And we're even seeing strains now. What they're doing is because people are getting better at preventing it through restoring backups, like not having to pay. What they're doing is they're actually exfiltrating data, pulling data out of your system, and then encrypting it. And then they're saying, if you don't pay us, we're going to dump this on the internet. So there goes a bunch of sensitive information and stuff being publicly released as well. So it's a really, really nasty thing. I do hour-long seminars just on ransomware, but it impacts everybody, and it's absolutely horrible to have to deal with. It really is.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. So Austin's question, he's got a couple. Do you have any thoughts on bolt-on services to banking, i.e. QuickBooks, Mint, and others which require linking bank access?
That's a tough one because, you know, I think we always have to be cautious when it comes to things like that. Here's the deal. Every piece of software out there is going to have vulnerabilities. We've heard a lot about Zoom this, Zoom that, right? Zoom was found out to have vulnerabilities because all of a sudden everyone and their brother was using it, right? They jumped user counts like huge in no time at all. Well, then the security people, including the good guys, are going to turn on that and they're going to start trying to security test it, right? That's what we call white hat hackers. They're looking for vulnerabilities and reporting them. That's why all of a sudden you saw all of these vulnerabilities in Zoom. Well, you're going to have the same thing in just about any software. So you have to understand there is always a risk if you're connecting things to your bank accounts, right? It's a matter of looking at, is this an established organization that you're doing this with? Are you willing to take the risk? And what do you do if it does go all wrong, right? That's kind of the key things you have to ask yourself. I try not to connect too many things in there. I mean, I'll be honest, I have a PayPal account. It links to my USAA checking account and can move money out, right? But I'm really cautious. I protect my PayPal account with just as much security as I do my bank account. So I have multi-factor authentication there, which is, when I go to log in, I have to either pull up an app on my phone and get a number off that, or it's going to text me a number. It's something other than just my username and password in order to log in. So it's a matter of having those protections in place like that as well. Because honestly, the least secure way is going to be the way that, that's going to be easiest to get into your account, whether it's your actual bank account or a third party.
Great. So let's do Austin's second question, and then let's revisit Samir's questions. So the second question from Austin, do you have any advice on using and or choosing a password manager? Are browser-based password managers a good idea?
Aha. I love password managers. Let's just put that out there right now. I love password managers. Password managers are essentially a way to deal with all of these passwords that we have to have, right? All of us probably have 30, 40, 50, some of us 100 or more passwords that we have to deal with. And us as security professionals, we go around and say, it has to be unique. It has to be long. It has to be complex, and you have to, don't write them down. I mean, it's an impossible task, right? That's where password managers step in. Now, what I love about password managers, and I use LastPass, and I also use 1Password for some other things. Okay, but LastPass is my big one that I use for most things. It is an online one, and it shares on my cell phone. It shares on computers, different computers. So I have access to these passwords just about anywhere. Now, I go to sign up for a new account, ask me for my username. I can put that in there. If it doesn't need my email address as the username, I may put something random in there, and the password manager keeps that. Okay. Then when it comes time to generate a password, how many of you have sat there going, oh, great, I got to come up with some other password? So what do? You reuse the one that you use the most, right? Well, what you do here is you can go to your password manager, and let's say it says 6 to 40 characters. Well, nobody's ever going to, in their own mind, come up with a 40 character, but you pull that slider over in there, you say generate password with all this kind of stuff, you paste it in, and you create the account with that. It's automatically saved now in your password vault. Now, when you go back to that page, sometimes it'll automatically fill it in for you. You hit a little thing and say, yes, fill this in, or you may open your what's called the vault and copy that and paste it in. Fantastic, fantastic tools. Again, protect them with multi-factor or whatever, so that you don't just use a username and password to get in. And that should be your very tough one. But I love browser-based ones. There are also ones like what's called KeyPass, which I've used in the past. The problem is, if something happens to that machine and all of your passwords are on that machine and they all go away, you're in a world of trouble. Now, is there a risk to having passwords in the cloud? Yes. However, not too long ago, I wouldn't say it was a year, maybe 2 years ago, LastPass was quote unquote hacked. The thing is, They use your password to encrypt things before it ever gets to them. So even they can't decrypt what's in your vault up there. So them being hacked is not really a problem. If the person got all these passwords, or the bad guys got all these problems or passwords, and you have all these long passwords that are encrypted well, it's going to take them centuries to be able to try to get into these. And by then I would really hope that you've changed your Facebook password. I mean, so there's pros and cons to each. Some people don't like things in the cloud. Personally, looking at the security reviews that have gone on, 1Password and LastPass are two fantastic ones. LastPass is even free. I'm not sure about 1Pass, but they're great solutions for that sort of thing.
Awesome. I think you just answered the majority of the questions that Samir had in his first two, but let me read them just in case there is something else you want to throw in here for advice. He wanted to know about a manageable password strategy. How often should you change your passwords and using a random password? So you pretty much touched on all that.
Well, there's arguments about the how often to change passwords.
Yeah.
Changing passwords in a corporate environment can be an absolute nightmare, because when we're talking about servers and things, we'll change a password on a service that takes out things we had no idea it was going to do that. So it can be very ugly sometimes. If you have a long and unique password, in other words, you don't use it anywhere else. You don't use it on your knitting forum, where if they get hacked, then they're going to reuse it in another place. If you have a unique one, I honestly believe that changing your password is not as critical on a time frame as it was in the past. The reason you change it is because somebody may get a hold of it over here, or they may brute force it, which is where they take a computer and try to break it down, essentially. But if you have a strong one, it's going to take them years. So what, maybe every year or so you change your password? I personally am okay with that, as long as it's a unique and long one that's complex.
Okay, great. And then I want to read the scenario he shared because I think it's probably relevant for everyone. You hit on advice already on this, but in case you have anything extra. So I've received emails lately from a different person name each time, but all structured the same, saying that they know my password. They typed it into the email and they know even more about me, and they're going to expose more details if I don't respond to their email. I've been ignoring the emails, but should I address it? Should I report it? And more importantly, how do I prevent it from happening again?
Yeah, so we've seen a rash of these that really started with what's called sextortion emails a couple of years ago. This is where we really saw these come into play, and it was you went to a website and a not good website, and we turned on your camera while you were there, and now if you don't pay us, we're going to release this video footage to everybody. And by the way, just to tell you, we know your password is XYZ, right? And when this first happened, we had people panicking. And I heard about it all the time. Oh my gosh, they have my password. Well, here's the scary part about this. In those traditional ones and those ones back then, the passwords they were using when this first came out were from a 10-year-old LinkedIn breach, which is another problem. If somebody comes up and goes, oh my gosh, they have my password, and it's a 10-year-old password you're still using, that's a problem, folks. But they do this to try to scare people. Remember the fear piece, right? So they're trying to prove that they have this information. But most of the time, that's going to come out of another data breach from another source. If you want to learn some things about yourself, take your email password, or your not your password, take your email address and go to Have I Been Pwned, PWNED, I think it is, haveibeenpwned.com. It's a website by Troy Hunt. And what it'll do is he takes all of these breaches and puts them in a database, and you can see if you've been a victim of a breach at some point in time. Well, odds are if you were, in a lot of cases, they have passwords, and they will put those in there from these breaches just to try to make it relevant to you. So here's what I suggest is ignore them. They're not real. If you want to, you can report them to like the IC3, which is the FBI's webpage, IC3. But nothing's really going to happen with that, to be honest with you. These things, the source, the emails, the website they send you to, they pop up and down so quickly, it's not even going to happen. As far as preventing it, not going to happen. Unfortunately, the internet and email itself is designed in such a way that it's very, very, it's more about resilience than it is security. And so it's very hard unless you are in a corporate environment where maybe you want to apply what's called SPF records or sender policy framework, and DMARC and DKIM, which are a couple of technologies that really try to limit this spoofing. There really isn't much you can do when somebody sends you an email that says they're somebody they aren't. The email is just not designed to be secure that way.
Great. We've got 2 in queue. Gosh, I'm so glad, Austin, you brought this up, because this literally just happened to one of my best friend's parents. But the question is, I always worry about my elderly family members accidentally downloading keylogger malware. Is that a reasonable thing to worry about?
Yeah, it still happens. And what will happen is it's generally not keylogger like the old keyloggers, which is everything you type. But we see, I think it's Stridex and some of the other ones, they're usually focused around banking. So when you go to a banking website, it will start recording everything you type in, i.e. username, password, all that kind of stuff, right? And then it sends it back. It is a real threat. It is a real problem. So to avoid this, make sure they have really good endpoint protection on their computers. Believe it or not, Windows Defender is not bad. It's actually a halfway decent product. And I hate myself for saying that, but it's free. It comes with things. It's actually pretty darn good. There's also Sophos has some decent stuff out there that's free. You can set these things up on there. We actually have a home course and a family version. We put out a bunch of stuff with COVID-19, and I'll see if I can get you a link on this too. But it's training for people that are, kids to elderly, to help them avoid that too. And I find it interesting. In my mother and father-in-law cannot be any more different. Okay, my mother-in-law, she's the one that downloads every possible iteration of Mahjong or whatever whenever she sees it. My father-in-law, on the other hand, is the guy that wants to turn off the computer every single night because he's afraid if he leaves it connected to the internet, it's definitely going to get hacked by the Russians. They live in the same household. It is a crazy relationship. I do a lot of tech support for them. But I do find all kinds of malware on their machines from my mother-in-law downloading these things. So it's important to teach them as much as you can, but it is a real threat. Your endpoint protection is probably going to be some of your better protection against that. Occasionally, you may want to run some anti-malware software on their machine for them.
Great, thank you. So next question from Stan: for multi-factor authentication, which methods are the most or least secure? Text, email, app, etc.
Okay, so when you ask about most secure and least secure, that's an interesting topic, because most secure is not where most people should be. I'll be perfectly honest about that. The most secure I've seen and I've dealt with was when I was with the Army. We had multi-factor in some certain rooms that we had to go through that we had classified things in. I would have to use my fingerprint. I would have to use what's called a CAT card. It's a smart card that I had that had Windows credentials on it. I would have to put that in the reader. I would have to unlock it with a PIN number. Okay, that's 3 different things. I had to have my fingerprint, a PIN number, and the card in my hand. All right, that's 3-factor. That is not something that most people should have, but it is one of the most secure, right? So let's put that in a different, if you don't mind me rephrasing this, what is the best for most people? Now, most people are familiar with the text message we get from the bank. The banks have taught us to do that. We already have our cell phones with us all the time. Getting a text message in order to log in, we've already been trained through the years to do that. It is the least secure. It is the easiest to get people to adopt. What I like to see is kind of in the middle between a text message and having to physically have a token, like a YubiKey or something like that. Although I protect my LastPass with a YubiKey, which is a hardware key, In the middle is the apps that we have on smartphones, like Google Authenticator or one of those sorts of deals. What it does is it generates a code that resets every 30 seconds or so. If you've ever used those, it's terrifying when it starts flashing red and all that kind of good stuff, but it is one step up from having that text message, because those can be intercepted. There's ways to get past that. But what it does is it prompts you to enter that number, and you have 30 seconds, or it resets the number on your phone. Since we mostly have smartphones these days anyways, we already have the devices on us that we would be getting text messages for. It's not a huge step to get to that point, but it is far more effective than just text messages.
Awesome. I'm going to ask one last question, and then if there are any additional questions, please send me, a message offline, and we can work on trying to get those answered for you. But last one, any thoughts on endpoint protection for mobile phones?
For me, mobile phones are not the biggest issue. And I know there's some people out there that do it. What is it? Lookout is one of them. I know there's some out there. It really depends on what you use your mobile for. So here's the deal. I have an iPhone. I can basically only get things from the Apple store, right? And Apple is really good about killing things that are malicious very, very quickly. They do a pretty good job with that. Android, what we see is most of the problems caused by Android are people going to third-party app stores, or what's called side-loading APKs, putting their own software on there. They kind of have to go out of their way to do that. I personally don't run endpoint protection on my phone. I have in the past with Lookout, because Lookout also offered some tracking stuff. My wife once left her phone on a tailgate of a pickup truck while they were fishing. And while this was going on, somebody walked by and snatched it. Now they were like putting stuff up, and there's traffic around some of these areas. Somebody snatched it, and I was able to actually trace it to where the person had taken it to their house through that. And it was fantastic for that. But I never saw anything in antivirus that would have concerned me from that standpoint. The other option is you need to have something that can wipe a device remotely as well. So if you do lose something, you're able to basically brick it and remove all of your personal information. That's where I see the protection being valuable on phones, more so than, say, antivirus.
Great. Erich, I can surely speak on behalf of everyone when I say thank you so much for all of this wonderful education that you've provided the nonprofit community and volunteers that help out with nonprofits. I included some of the links to what Erich recommended, including that 22 tips for emails, as well as the password manager. Stan, thank you for providing the link to Have I Been Pawned? So make sure you save these links and scope those out. The last two things I want to say is we did record today's session. So I would highly, highly, highly encourage you just simply to remember that we have a recording of today's session. And for anyone else who volunteers or works at your nonprofit, share that recording, share the links that we provided with those folks. Maybe encourage it to be part of your onboarding process, because this is a topic, Erich, I'm sure you're going to say amen. It is not talked about enough, and people just do not understand the basics. And it is heartbreaking. We've even had a nonprofit that came to one of our meetings and they had malware on their computer and had no idea. And luckily, we have a number of folks in the security world that are active with our Tech4Good groups through TechSoup, and they were able to get that removed and make this individual aware they had malware. So again, really educate other folks in your circle, spread the wealth, and also keep in mind we've got 6 other recordings. I included the link. But if you have an interest in search engine optimization, in WordPress Give, which is the donation plugin, one of them for WordPress websites, we've got topics that you can go back and access 45 to 60-minute recordings. And then the last thing for me, we've got 2 other events on our calendar right now that are available for everyone because they're in the form of webinars like today. Next week, we're actually doing a crash course on how to use Adobe Spark to make visual campaigns and images. And Adobe Spark actually just announced this week that their product is going to be free for 2 months. This is amazing timing for that webinar, unintentional. And then we're doing in May, we're doing a session on how to make sure your nonprofit website is accessible. It is a requirement now that your website is accessible for everybody. And that's another area that nonprofits just simply are not educated about. Erich, any last words from you?
No, nothing other than, just be careful out there. We just see so many attacks happening right now with the chaos of moving people to home and all of that. Just be careful. Try to warn your people to be very, very careful with the emails. And if they have that, like I said, the spidey sense sort of tingle, please make sure they act on it, take a deep breath and look at it, because man, it is just getting crazy right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. We hope to catch you in one of our next couple webinars over the next month or so. And as always, keep us posted. Eli, who runs the NetSquared Tech4Good group locally. Again, my name's Erica. I'm an organizer for the Tampa group. I'm also still involved with the Baltimore group. Keep me posted, especially if you're in either of those two cities, on what else we can be doing to help support your nonprofit right now, or just any questions from a technology standpoint. And we'll make sure we get the right people looped in. Thanks, Erich. Nice seeing you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.